Number 2. I was helping another nurse with a patient that had lived a very hard life. He had numerous things going on, from cardiac to renal failure. You name it, he had it going on. This man was very much afraid to die. He never told anyone why, but I suppose everyone's afraid to die really. Every time his heart monitor beeped, he would just go into a raging scream. "Don't let me die! Don't let me die!" He clearly wasn't ready to go. At 2 a.m, his cardiac monitor starts alarming VTAC. We both rush into the room, and I am pulling the crash cart behind me. When I get to the room, the other nurse is completely white. This man was sitting about 2 inches above the bed and was laughing. His whole look had completely changed. His eyes had a look of pure evil on them, and he had the most malicious grin on his face. He laughed at us and said, "You stupid cows aren't gonna let me die, are you?" And then he laughed again. We were kind of frozen. I did reach up and hit the code blue button, and when I did, the man went into VFib. He crashed back on the bed and we started coding him. But after 20 minutes it was called. 5 minutes after the code was called, several of the cleaning team were in there doing their business when the man sits up straight in bed and says, "You let him die. Too bad," and then begins laughing maniacally. The man collapsed back into the bed, and then we heard the most horrible, agonizing scream resonate through the hallways. You could hear "Don't let me die" be whispered throughout the whole unit. Every one of the nurses that night was pale and scared. Nobody went anywhere by themselves. By morning, though, the whispering had subsided. The night shift nurses had a prayer service in the break room before we left for home. But still, we all had nightmares for weeks. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm a 22-year-old guy from Switzerland. I live in a small city called Brick-Gills. The special thing about this city is that I have pretty much all stores and restaurants I need at my doorstep. And at the same time, I only live 10 minutes away from the blissful tranquility of nature, which is something that I love. Just to the south of the city are mountains, as well as the very famous Simplon Pass, a place I enjoy going to often. Anyway, my aunt has a cabin up there, not too far from Simplon Pass, in an area just called Simplon. As a kid, I would love going there. The way the house was built was beautiful, and it was great for chilling. I remember the first day I went there, my aunt told me that we couldn't be at the house on a Wednesday, and yes, she meant Wednesdays in general. Because as the story goes, apparently, every Wednesday, the house gets visited by the ghost family that built this house in the 1850s. Our neighbours would see lights turning on and off by themselves, seeing silhouettes and hearing crying sounds when no one was in. But it only happened on Wednesdays, so my aunt decided to just never use it on a Wednesday. I didn't believe her, even as a kid. I mean, I'd never had a paranormal experience in my life. Why would I? That was, of course, until now. So the years passed and I was getting older. I turned 22 last week and asked my auntie to lend me the cabin in order to celebrate my birthday with my friends. I didn't want a regular birthday party. I wanted something special. So we went up to the mountains to be amongst nature, with clean air and beautiful views. It was divine. It was Tuesday evening now. We were just sitting outside, chilling and chatting. But it started to get cold. So we went inside to watch a few movies. It was late, and most of us drifted off to sleep on the sofa. But when I woke up, it was around midnight, and me and my friend got up and went to bed. I woke up suddenly. I heard people whispering, and apparently my friends were stirring in their sleep. I looked down and picked up my phone to check the time. 2:33 a.m. or so, and it was Wednesday. One of my friends was laying on the air mattress on the floor, and the other two friends were sleeping in a separate room. I looked down at him, and he was already looking at me with big eyes. "You heard it too, right?" I replied, "I didn't actually hear anything, but it is probably what woke me up." At that moment, we could see a faint light coming out through under the door. I got up and opened the door just to see which one of my other friends was still up. But as soon as I opened the door, the lights went off, just like that. I walked around the house and searched for someone. Finally, I went to the room with my other friends. I opened the door, and they were both asleep. I was wondering what was going on. I still didn't think about the whole Wednesday thing. It didn't come to mind at all. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I thought my friend came out of his room to see where I was. But as I turned to talk to him, there was no one else there. I was getting freaked out at this point, so I decided to go back to my room where my friend was. He was on his phone. I got in. He put his phone away and asked me which one of the two friends was making the noise. I replied, "They're both sleeping, dude." He looked at me confused and asked, "So who was it then, turning on the light?" I shrugged and went back to bed. But not 10 minutes later, we heard talking in front of our door. It was a female voice, so it couldn't be our friend. My friend and I, both still awake, were just looking at each other whilst listening. After about 2 minutes it stopped. We didn't hear anything for the rest of the night. The next day came and we drove home. I thought about how funny it was the thing happened at night, and when it came to mind, the story that my uncle told me, I was just sitting in my house and thinking about it. Did it really happen? Like I said, I never had any paranormal experiences before. I searched for an explanation. My friends didn't know about the story, so why would they prank me like this? And even if they did, how did they manage to do it without lights? So there was no way for one of those friends to turn the lights on and off, whilst going back to bed without walking into me. And the footsteps? I turned so fast that there was no time to get away from them. So what was that? I will never go back to this house again. Don't even care which day of the week it is. This was told to me by my cousin that lived next door to me through my teenage years. She was in high school at the time, and I was in middle school. But we would ride the same bus along with a bunch of other kids that lived down our same street, as well as our siblings. She told me that one day she got home after school and she decided to take a shower because their high school was having soccer tryouts during their 7th period, and she did not get a chance to shower at school before the bell rang. She said she'd been in the shower for about 15 minutes when she heard the front door open and close. She figured that it was her older sister, so she called out. "Anna, is that you?" Anna replied, "Yeah, it's me." My cousin continued to shower for a while longer before getting out and getting dressed. As she was walking out of the bathroom, she asked out loud, "So how was your day?" There was no reply. "Anna?" Nothing. That's odd, she thought. She peered into every bedroom as well as the living room and kitchen. There was no one home, and the front door was still locked with her key in it, exactly the way she'd left it before getting in the shower. So there was no way Anna could have actually come into the house. Perplexed, she called Anna on her mobile phone and asked her where she'd gone. "What do you mean?" Anna asked. "I stayed after school," my cousin told her. "But I heard you come in a while ago whilst I was in the shower. I even asked if it was you and you replied yes." Anna had no idea what she was talking about. She was a little freaked out, so she searched the entire house to guarantee that she was alone. And she was. They never did find out who replied that day. I'm female. I lived in Aurora, Illinois until I was 11 years old. Ever since the age of 6, I could see ghosts and spirits, as well as feel and hear things that most people cannot. After leaving a terrible marriage, I found and moved in with my then boyfriend. I was 19, and we were expecting our first child together. One day after coming home from work, while serving him dinner, I kept seeing a shadow person standing in the corner behind the door. At first, I thought it was just a friend acting weird, but when I asked him who else was in the house, he told me that it was just us. I immediately got very uncomfortable. The dark shadow just stayed there, looking at me. I went to the bathroom to splash some water on my face. I honestly thought I was just tired and seeing things. But when I came out, he was still there. I asked him again if he was sure, and he replied that no one was here and asked why. I told him it was because I could see someone. He went over and stood exactly where I told him the shadow person was. The shadow proceeded to move. He checked the house as I felt the shadow stare me down. By this time I was terrified. I started to hate being home alone with my daughter from my first marriage. She'd have random meltdowns, which I'd always chopped up to being her imagination. We eventually moved into a trailer park community. By this time our daughter was born, and I was pregnant again with twins. After moving in, I started seeing a tall man, dressed like an Orthodox Jew. Dressed like an Orthodox Jewish man in the black suit, hat, with the big curls. I got that same creepy feeling I had when we lived in the apartment. I knew it had to be the same shadow person I'd experienced before. I started hearing things, voices, as well as feel someone touch me. I was afraid to be in the trailer by myself. I would feel cold spots. I heard one day someone whisper in my ear, "The trailer is on fire." But it was in my sister's voice. She didn't live with me and wasn't visiting. I felt the breath on my skin as they said it. I turned around so quickly, and no one was there. I then called my sister up in a panic and asked her where she was. She told me that she was at work, and at that point I was starting to get seriously spooked. She told me that I might be tired, but I reassured her that I had just woken up from an hour-long nap. I was wide awake. Things would move from place to place after you left them in a specific spot. You would start to hear people walking around when there'd be no one there. One day, as I was potty training my 2-year-old to go to the bathroom at night, I was filled with so much fear. As I crept towards her room, I saw the man in the black suit standing right in front of her door, as if he were guarding them or waiting for me. I froze the moment I saw him. I finally summoned enough courage to take a step forward, but as soon as I did, so did the man. I took a step back and so did he. I wanted to run. I felt a fear like never before, but I wanted more than anything to get this spirit away from my girls. Halfway down the trailer there's a window. Trust me, it helps with visuals. I start taking a step forward and so did he. No backing down. I kept repeating to myself. Every step I took brought us closer, and more fear attacked everything within me. As we came face to face, I inhaled deeply and stepped forward. Never in my life have I had so much fear in me. I can only describe it as this. This spirit is passing within me. I lost my breath instantly. When I started stepping forward, I was immediately filled with every ounce of hate this thing had. I felt hate, vengeance, depression, the need to kill, betray and defeat, and so much anger. I could only describe it as borderline demonic. I was paralyzed, but not out of fear. I truly could not move. After about 2 minutes, I was able to continue moving and regained my breath. I hurried down the hallway to see that he had turned to look at me, staring at me intently with those dark eyes filled with everything I had felt. Then I continued to walk as he did, and he gradually faded. I woke up my daughter, tucked her back into bed, and whilst I cried, my mum and dad were having a house party. I can't remember what for now, it was a good few years ago. My family from other parts of the UK had come to visit for the party, and a few were staying in the house. My mum's sister, Janet, was staying with us and was upstairs getting ready, whilst my mum and I were making sandwiches and other food ready for everyone to arrive, whilst also talking to her other sister Laura in the kitchen. Auntie Janet came storming down the stairs, hair still a little wet, hairbrush waving around, and marched right up to my mum's face and still waving her hairbrush and now saying at my mum, "I said, I'll be ready as quick as I can." Mum asked what she was talking about. You standing there looking at me in the mirror. I said 3 times to you, I'll be down as soon as I can. It's really creepy. My mum stayed calm. No one's upstairs but you, Janet. I've been here cooking with Laura and my daughter the whole time. The two of us nodded in agreement, telling Janet the truth. Mum had been in the kitchen the whole time. She even had her oven mitts on from taking things out and adding more things to the oven. Now looking as white as a sheet and shaking, my auntie told us how a lady, looking almost exactly like my mum, was staring at her, standing behind her, looking at her through the mirror. My auntie turned her hairdryer off, not taking her eyes off the mirror, and said, "Give me a minute." The lady walked away and started going down the stairs. My auntie drove the 2 hours home that night, not wanting to stay at my parents' house.